Hi everyone, in this video we're going to take our first look at synthesizing drums. This is one of my favourite topics and I've got lots of fun tips to show you. I'm going to be walking through this info using stock Ableton synths, but the principles and techniques are applicable to whatever synth plugins or VSTs you like to use. I'm going to be drawing heavily on Gordon Reid's Synth Secrets series of articles for Sound on Sound, all of which is available on the Sound on Sound website, which I'll link in the description. If you've never come across this series before, it's a pretty comprehensive look at basically every type of synthesis and includes analysis of a huge range of different acoustic sounds and how to replicate them with synthesizers. The drum articles are particularly great, and I refer back to them constantly when designing my own drum sounds. Big tip for anyone wanting to learn more about synthesis. Okay, we're going to start this series with the big boy, the kick drum. There are so many classic drum machines with distinctive sounds, and for synthesized kick drums, perhaps none are more iconic than the Roland TR-808 and 909. These drums have been foundational to the development of styles from hip-hop and house to techno and footwork. I feel pretty confident in saying that even if you don't know what they're called, you'll recognise how they sound. We're going to start by trying to produce some sounds that are in the same ballpark. For this, we're going to turn to Ableton's Operator. Operator is a versatile synth that combines FM and subtractive synthesis methods. One key benefit of this over other instruments like analog is that Operator starts our waveform from the same point every time we trigger it. The phase is consistent from note to note. Analog doesn't do this because it's styled after hardware in which the oscillators are always running, so they don't get re-triggered from the beginning of the cycle when a new note comes in. This means that for drum sounds, our transient, the snappy upward portion of our signal, are inconsistent, which isn't necessarily what we want for electronic music. Let's have a listen to an 808 kick sample. It sounds great, but there's a pretty simple sound to recreate. We're going to start with the fundamental, the bass pitch of our kick drum sound. Let's reset our amp envelope so that we just get a simple, consistent level when we press and let go of the note. We'll come back to our envelopes and how to shape them later. Operator has a wide variety of different waveforms that we can select for each of its 4 oscillators. So the question is, which one we're going to use? The TR-808 uses what's called a bridged T network to produce its kick drum sound, which is basically a self-oscillating filter that's triggered with an electrical pulse that decays out on its own. No need for an amp envelope. This type of circuit produces oscillations that are more or less sine waves. They're very harmonically pure. If we play a low G note and compare it to this 808 kick sample, you can hear we're already in a similar zone. Now the bridge T network in the 808 may not need an amp envelope, but since we're working with software synthesis, we certainly will. Fortunately, to recreate the decay of the signal, all we need is a 2-stage attack-release or AR envelope. An AR envelope has a period during which the signal climbs up to its peak amplitude, and then a second period during which it settles back down to 0. To recreate this with the 4-stage ADSR interface that we have in Operator, we're going to bring our sustain level all the way down, and then we'll just focus on the attack and decay controls. Something to notice here is that if we hold down our MIDI note, Operator will progress through the decay stage of the envelope all the way through. But if we let go before the decay stage finishes, then it will go from wherever the envelope is down to 0 according to the length of the release setting instead. This can mean inconsistent envelopes for our drums if some of our MIDI notes are longer than others. So the simplest way to avoid this behaviour is to set the decay and release times to the same value. Let's set the attack as fast as it'll go, and I'll match the decay and release times by ear to our sample. Okay, we've got our sine wave and we're happy with the envelope. What else? Well, you may hear that the onset of our synthesized kick doesn't have as much punch as the 808 sample. To give it a bit more oomph, let's use a pitch envelope to change the frequency of our oscillator over time. If we start at a higher pitch and very quickly decay to a lower pitch, we can get much closer to the punchiness that we're after. This sounds much better, and you can play around with the decay time and peak level of the pitch envelope to produce a huge array of different and characterful kick sounds just from this simple sine wave oscillator. There's a snap to the transient that's missing from our synth patch, so let's dial in a very short burst of white noise on one of the other oscillators in Operator. By default, Operator is set up to have each oscillator modulate one another in a chain, but we just want to hear the output of each of our oscillators mixed together instead. To do this, we'll go to the master section down here and choose this option that has each one outputting separately. We'll then set the waveform on oscillator B to white noise and give it a very fast attack and a slightly slower decay. Something we'll need to do in order to hear this properly is to stop the filter frequency from listening to the pitch of the MIDI note that's coming in. Because the pitch of our MIDI note coming in is so low, the frequency of the filter is actually turning way down, meaning that we can't hear that nice bright attack. We can change the character of this click using Operator's low pass filter too. Okay, so we're getting pretty close. We could definitely leave it there and have a really solid kick sound. But to get closer to our reference sample, we could do more to try and get some of that mid-range attack into the click sound. Let's layer in another noise source. This time, the looped kind. True white noise is random, and therefore it doesn't have a pitch. But if we use a loop of random values as a noise source, then we can pitch it up and down like we would any other type of oscillator, which gives us control over the frequency content of the noise. This is perfect for making an additional clicky layer that will sit in the mid-range of our kick. I'm just going to tweak the controls until I get something that I like. Cool. So one last touch to get some of the grit and aggression we can hear in the sample is to use Ableton's different filter styles to give it some subtle analog flavour with a little bit of drive. I'm just going to play around with the different modes here and see what I like. There we go. A quick A-B comparison. First our sample. We can of course play around with the synth and tweak it to our liking, and I absolutely encourage you to do so. Change the parameters to settings that you'd never get from a real 808. You could distort it, get freaky with the pitch envelope, even layer it up with some FM oscillators to give it some extra funk. All the things we've done with this synth are techniques you can apply to all sorts of drum and percussion sounds, so go experiment with what we've picked up here. Okay, so we've created an 808 sound, but what about the 909? As you can see from the synth secrets diagram, it's a bit of a different beast, but it shares a lot of the same principles in the end. Looking at the sound source here, the 909 uses a sawtooth wave that's passed through a wave shaper to get rid of most of the harmonics and end up with something close to a sine wave. As you can hear, the resulting sound is still quite a bit more harmonically complex than a sine wave, and to tell the truth, I've had some trouble trying to synthesize something with the same character. For the main body of the 909 sound then, we're going to go over to Wavetable. Let's start by setting the amp envelope to a similar attack release shape as we had on the 808 sound. We'll also need a similar pitch envelope, so let's use envelope 2 and set it up to change the pitch using the modulation matrix. So I'm taking envelope 2 as my source, going over to the pitch, What wavetable synthesis allows us to do is to smoothly change between different waveforms by moving the position of the wavetable down here. What we want is somewhere between a sine wave and a triangle wave in terms of harmonic character, so let's start there. Something else wavetable allows us to do is to change the position of the wavetable and go from one waveform to another using an envelope, which is going to help us get closer to the 909 sound, which has more harmonics at the start of the sound and less while it decays. Let's point our amp envelope very slightly at our wavetable position. The effect is subtle, but it really helps animate our kick and adds to the punch. We're then going to make use of wavetable's sub-oscillator in the same octave as our fundamental, just to reinforce with an additional sine wave layer. Next, we want to recreate this portion of the circuit, which combines a pulse, basically a click like we had in our 808, with some low-pass filtered noise. We're going to tab over to oscillator 2 and select the white noise table. We're only looking to make a click, so we'll need to use our third envelope to control the level of oscillator 2. The time settings should be familiar enough by now. And we're going to once again use the low pass filter to shape the brightness of the resulting sound. That's the click then, but we still need some low pass noise too. This is where we're going to start to get a little bit more complicated because we need another synth to provide this layer for us. With wavetable selected, I'm going to hit Command and G, or it's Control and G if you're on Windows, to wrap an instrument rack around this instance of wavetable. If we then open it up over here, we can drop an operator into a separate chain, and both synths will trigger the same MIDI notes at the same time. Let's go for white noise as a source again, this time with a longer decay than we've had with our clicks. I'm going to turn this right down, and with some filtering we can layer this in very gently to get some texture into our kick. The click could do with some more presence, so let's create another one on another oscillator and operator, try saying that 5 times fast, for additional brightness. We set the filter on wavetable fairly low, so this extra click layer will bring more brightness through the higher set filter on operator. I think that sounds pretty good. Wavetable synthesis is a super powerful tool for making drum sounds, as you can tell, and the modulation matrix in Ableton's Wavetable synth gives us lots of possibilities for making sounds that are really out there. Layering synths using instrument racks is a great way of making your sound design richer and more complex, and there's nothing stopping you from having heaps of different layers all working as one. Operator is one of my favourite sound design tools, and you can get real great results from very simple patches, so I hope between these two demos you've picked up some inspiration for making your own sounds. I've rolled up the synth patches from this video into a pair of instrument racks, complete with macro controls over all the core settings, plus a couple of extra details, and those are available to download to members at the Helping Hand tier on Patreon. As always, I'm available for one-on-one and small group tuition with priority places for queer, trans, non-binary and black and minority ethnicity folks. You can go to outsiderspeaks.co.uk to find out more about that and get in touch. Finally, thank you so much for being a Patreon backer, and I hope you learned some fun stuff in this video. Drop any drum synthesis questions or requests that you have for topics to cover in future videos down in the comments, and I'll see you next week.